Welcome to the webinar of Teaching Supply Chain Management by We Use Storytelling. My name is Yao. I'm a professor at Rutgers Business School. I've been teaching for 24 years. Most of the materials covered today come from my textbook on supply chain analytics. I'll be happy to share it electronically to instructors. And also, part of the material comes from my Coursera specialization on supply chain analytics. Let me start with AI compatible versus AI replaceable education. I think it's one of the most pressing concerns or issues in today's higher education. The real world is a mess. So a typical business decision-making process involves 3 steps. The first step is on framing, identifying the right problem to solve. The second step is formulate and solve the problem, is solution. And the third step is judgment, interpret the results, make decisions, and take responsibility. Well, as everybody knows, AI is taking over the solution. Once the problem is well defined, AI can solve it very quickly and cheaply. But human is still needed for framing, determine which problem to solve and which direction to go, and judgment, which essentially make decisions, understand the solution, and most importantly, be held accountable for the decisions. Now, if we look at our curriculum, what we were focusing on, mostly about solutions, which is exactly the strengths of AI. So we are producing students competing with AI, essentially. And I think we're not going to survive this. And we must change the content and make our students compatible with AI. And we must also change our pedagogy, the way we teach. I'll tell you about 2 ways of teaching. The first way, as described by Mark Twain, is that college is a place where a professor's lecture notes go straight to the students' lecture notes without passing through the brains of either. It is actually, the way to train AI, not human beings. The right way or the better way to train humans is described by pedagogy, He said, the mind is not a vessel that needs filling, but wood that needs igniting. So we have to ignite the fire, like this guy, For to train humans, we need to be inspiring and eye-opening. Well, how to do that? We use storytelling. We use storytelling or storytelling alone, ignites the fire because it tells a story hidden behind data. So what do we say in this picture? Some people will say a random pile of rocks, but actually there is a human face hidden, beneath the pictures. So this is not obvious, often counterintuitive and inspiring. And storytelling also opens students' eyes by forging parts into the whole picture. Like in this picture, elephants with the blind man, So students will not only learn the technical details, but also, the whole picture, the big picture. Most importantly, storytelling is compatible with AI. Because it provides powerful tool, for human problem framing. That's the step before, problem solving, and also, human judgment and interpretation. That's the step after problem solving, So this skill is going to empower people, to work with AI. A lot of people ask me how to teach with your storytelling. The answer is actually very simple. Inspiring and eye-opening examples. So here, I'd like to share 3 most counterintuitive and useful examples. The first example is on supply chain butterfly effect, which tells us, counterintuitively, small operational shocks can cascade into major financial storms for many companies. And the second example is on sourcing analytics and Intel's stock rebound. Contrary to many people's belief, Intel is actually the best supplier for Apple. And Intel will not collapse, but rebound. Third story is about American Airlines, right? Showing the framework of problem definition and prioritization. Essentially, how to isolate problems, right, with the biggest financial impact. All right, let me first tell you the story on supply chain butterfly effect. I'm sure the butterfly effect is well known, right? Which describes a natural phenomenon, right, in which a butterfly flapping its wings may cause a major storm. Now, it turns out in supply chains, we can observe a similar effect, right? This is counterintuitive because what people believed, right, is supply chains, including purchasing, production, and logistics, right, are operational cost centers. That's how we frame supply chains and operations in general. But what's counterintuitive is supply chains, right? All these functions, right? They can be strategic drivers of market value for many companies. And the connection between supply chain management, right, and market value is not obvious, but critical. And I'm going to show you, right, how small operational shocks can cascade into major financial consequences for many companies, just like the butterfly effect. The supply chain butterfly effect works through a two-step chain reaction, right? A small change in the supply chain, let's say 1% or even 0.5% of the change in cost structure, can make a big difference or big impact on the financials, right? The bottom line, that is, for example, net income, right? Through the supply chain multiplier. The intuition behind this is very simple because cost is so high and profits are so thin, right? So any small change in the cost will generate a big impact on the profits, right? Now, the financial change can induce an even bigger change, right, in the stock market, right, for the company's market value, which is characterized by the financial multiplier. So an initial change in supply chains can trigger a sequence of reactions and eventually make a big impact, right, on the company's financial performance and market value. So now I'm going to show you step by step to convince you with real data this is happening. Okay, now let's take a closer look at the supply chain multiplier and how it works, right, by the revenue breakdown of major U.S. industries 2025. So from left to right, we have consumer discretionary, which is automobiles, fashions, furnitures, and so on, and consumer staples, that's food, drink, and alcohol, things like that, right? To energy, healthcare, right? Industrials, information technology, materials, real estate, and so on and so forth. And the first thing we observe is the red bar, which is cost of goods sold or cost of revenue, right? This is huge, right? Except for financials, right, which doesn't make any physical products, but for all the other industry, right, the cost of goods sold is the largest cost component, right? It accounts for more than 40% of the revenue, right? Typically from 40% to 80%. In comparison, right, the net income, which is in dark red at the top, right, is a much smaller portion of the revenue, right? Typically 4, 5 to 15%, no more than 20%. And I'm sure you know what is driving the cost of goods sold. It's supply chain and operations, right, such as purchasing, production, and inbound logistics, right? These are the primary driver of cost of goods sold. So now let's ask a financial analyst question. If we can save 1% of cost of goods sold, that is the red bar, by how much can we improve the net income, which is the dark red bar? It turns out the answer is simple, right? It is the cost of goods sold over net income, which we'll call this the supply chain multiplier. Why do we call this? Because this is the lever of supply chain on the financials. Right? Let's give an example. Right? Look at consumer staples. right? Cost of goods sold, almost 75% of revenue, right? It's the industry average. Net income is about 4% of the revenue. So which means for every 1% savings in cost of goods sold, we can improve net income by 19%. So the supply chain multiplier here is 19. And it is 10 for industrials, right? And it is about 3.7 for real estate, and so on and so forth. So if you look at the whole US, all the industries combined, excluding financials, right? 1% saving in cost of goods sold will generate a median of 10% improvements on net income. That's how much impact, right, supply chain can play on financials. Now it turns out, right, the supply chain multiplier is also company dependent, even if the company come from the same industry. And here I'm showing 3 consecutive years, right, revenue breakdown for a few major companies. You can pick up your own, but here I'm showing for Amazon, right, for which the supply chain multiplier is 8. So 1% change in cost of goods sold can generate 8% improvements in net income for Amazon. For Costco, right, it's 42. For Walmart, it's 25. And for Apple, it's 2. So essentially what I'm saying is, right, the supply chain multiplier can vary significantly, right, over different companies, right? So we need to look at this case by case, just like the butterfly effect, right? It may not generate a huge storm every time, but a big storm is definitely possible. Let's now look at how the market responds to earnings, right, which is tightly connected, right, to net income. So here I am showing how market responds to earnings or net income. So by plotting the net income and market cap over time, right, for some companies. Here I'm showing you an example of Walmart, right? If you overlay both curves over time, you will see that they can be highly correlated. And the movements, right, are actually highly synchronized. Movements, I mean the incrementals, right? So what I'm showing here is for many companies, they have highly synchronized movements of net income and market cap, which proves, right, there is some kind of causal relationship between them. So what I'm showing here is really the difference in difference method, right? I'm not showing any equations, but I'm visualizing, right, the difference in difference method. Let's calculate the financial multipliers, right, to understand, right, by how much the net income changes can be translated to market cap changes, right? So here I'm building a simple linear regression model, right, between net income and market cap. Using Walmart as an example, right, we'll find that here is the regression equation, right, with R squared about 68%. And here is how we interpret the regression equation. For every $1 billion increase in net income, right, Walmart can get on average about $43 billion increase, right, in market cap. So the financial multiplier here is 43, and R squared is 68%, which is quite strong. Now let's put things together, right? We know the supply chain multiplier, we know the financial multiplier, right? Let's now calculate the compounding effect for Walmart. In year 2025, 1% of cost of goods sold for Walmart is about $5 billion. But the supply chain multiplier, which is 25, right, come from the previous slide. So 1% change in cost of goods sold will generate a 25% change in net income. Actually, in this year, Walmart's net income is about $20 billion. And the financial multiplier, which is 43, right, the market response to 1% change, right, in cost of goods sold is 43 times 5, which is $215 billion. That is about 27% of Walmart's market value in this year. And so, right, for Walmart, right, 1% change of cost of goods sold, which is $5 billion, can never right? $215 billion change, which is 27% of Walmart's market value, right? And so a supply chain butterfly flapping its wings could generate a major storm in the stock market. Now, Walmart is just one example. I have many other examples, which is in this book. I'll be happy to share the slides and also the data. Right, and you can show, right, the significant impact not only for Walmart but for many other companies like Amazon, Costco, and so on. Of course, the magnitude of the storm is not the same across different companies. And some are very big, some may be small, right, depending on the cost structure. But the dollar value in all cases are huge. So you can bring, right, to your classroom, right, in the fall, on how important supply chain management is. My second story is even more interesting or more current, which is on sourcing analytics and Intel's stock rebound. Sourcing is such an important topic today because of the global trade restructuring. Right? Now the companies are looking for new suppliers, so they need to look into sourcing very carefully. And Intel rebound is a great story on sourcing analytics. Now, honestly, Intel has experienced a deep crisis in the past few years. Right? So many people believe that Intel is not a good IC supplier for Apple. IC stands for integrated circuits. And more importantly, Intel is probably about to collapse. There was a strong belief on this in just the past year. But if you look at the data thoroughly and really understand the meaning of the data, you will draw the exact opposite conclusion. Right? That is, Intel is actually the best supplier, IC supplier for Apple, even better than TSM, which is Apple's current IC supplier. And you also know that it was actually the best time to buy Intel. This is not a hindsight because we wrote everything into this paper, which published in 2025. So let me tell you the story. On the surface, actually Intel doesn't look very good. It used to be the world's largest semiconductor company. But if you look at here, year 2025, total revenue, right, for all the semiconductors, Intel is right here. It's much smaller than Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. For sure, TSM, right? Remember this because we're going to mention a lot this company later. And Intel is also much smaller than NVIDIA and even smaller than Broadcom, right? So Intel is not doing very well. And the market share analysis actually presents even a more holistic picture. It shows that Intel's market share, right, has been going down from 40% to 12% in 10 years. So Intel is definitely not doing very well. So how bad it is? It's actually very bad for Intel. So we plot out the net income, operating income, and total revenue for Intel and its major peers, right, such as AMD, right, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, TSM, and Broadcom together on the same graph. And we can see that Intel, which is in red, was falling, right, in all dimensions, although almost everybody else was growing. That means Intel has a problem for its own. It's not an industry-wide problem. It's Intel itself problem. As a result of the poor financials, Intel stock price, right, collapsed from about $70 per share to less than $20 per share, 70% down in 4 years. Because of this horrible, financial performance, significant loss, and lots of layoffs, the market is panicking. Most people just sold, Intel completely. If you did that, you probably missed one of the biggest opportunities in a lifetime. Why do I say that? Because we ask a different question. Right? Will Intel rebound or continue the downfall? We can actually break down this question into 4 smaller questions, and every one of that is very important. The first sub-question is, what what are the causes for Intel's crash? And does Intel have the chance to come back? And does Intel have the right strategy to come back? And finally, what signals to watch, either for rebound or for the downfall? So if you collect all the data to answer these questions, you will actually get a completely different conclusion than those investors leaving or selling everything about Intel. So the causes for Intel's crash is actually very simple. I'm sure everybody knows that. It's the market shift, right, during 2022 to 2024 from CPUs, right, to GPUs. Right, CPU becomes not so popular, right? Everybody was chasing after GPUs to train AIs. So in this period, right, Intel cannot switch quickly. Intel was essentially focusing on the wrong product and market. That's why its revenue was decreasing and profit was dropping. Now, let's find out if Intel have the chance. Right, the best way of answering this question is to look at their total assets. Right, now we break down the total assets of Intel and together with other peers, right, to liabilities and equity, we find Intel is very healthy financially, right, because its total shareholders' equity is about 60% of the total assets, and total current liabilities and non-current liabilities, meaning short-term and long-term liabilities, are very limited. In fact, Intel is healthier, right, than Broadcom, than Qualcomm, and Texas Instruments. So Intel definitely have the chance to come back. If there is a picture that completely changed my view on Intel, it is this one, right? The production capacity picture, right? On this graph, it shows Intel has the world's largest, right, manufacturing capability or production capacity on semiconductor, right? Even more than TSM, or at least comparable to TSM, and much bigger than everybody else, right? So, and these companies, these semiconductor companies, are really, they call them fabulous, right, semiconductors. They are semiconductor designers with no fabrication capabilities. In fact, they all outsource their production to TSM, right? So, after seeing this picture, I'm pretty confident Intel will survive, right? Because only Intel and TSM really has the manufacturing or fabrication capabilities. In addition to Intel's strong production capability, Intel's supply chain capability is also superior, because Intel has the capability to secure, right, the critical raw materials and production equipment. Intel is one of the largest shareholders of ASML, right? And ASML controls more than 80% of the lithography equipment market. In fact, the first, right, EUV high NA equipment, right, or machine goes to Intel. That was happening in 2024. Now, putting all these facts together, right, we find that Intel's strength is not design, but foundry. If you look at the semiconductor foundry industry, right, there are two major suppliers or players, right, TSM and Samsung Electronics. Combining their market share is about 75%. However, both of them are under substantial geopolitical threat. So Intel's value is it's the only hope for mass production of advanced chips in the US. Right? So it is not going to fall because it is a national security issue. Does Intel have the right strategy to come back? The answer is yes. Intel launched Intel Foundry, right, AFS, to advance to 2 nanometer, the advanced fabrication or process of fabrication in year 2024. And Intel claimed it wants to make chips for all the other semiconductor companies. Now, fabrication, right, is the right strategy for Intel because for 3 reasons. right? First, it utilizes Intel's strengths, but not weakness. Right? Second, right, advanced foundry is in high demand. It's such a bottleneck. And finally, right, advanced foundry, right, builds a long-term advantage with very few competitors. All right, now let's make a prediction on Intel's value, right, if Intel's foundry services, right, succeeds. All right, looking at this picture, right, we first notice that Intel is here at the end of 2024, right, in terms of market cap. At that time, Intel's market cap is about half of AMD's market cap and 1/10 of TSM's market cap. Because of the negative net income, right? Now, however, right, Intel's total revenue, right, and the shareholder equity are not that far away from TSM, right, and much bigger than AMD. Right? It's just because it was losing money, right? And that's why it was valued so low. However, right, the revenue and shareholder equity, meaning it could come back, right? So if, let's say, if Intel's foundry is successful and Intel claim back the market share, let's say if Intel can match up TSM revenue and profits like it happened before, because they have similar technology, right? In just past few years, let's say year 2020, 21, and so on. In those years, Intel's revenue and profits is about the same as TSM, and Intel's value at that time is about 1/3, right, or half of TSM's value. And looking at today's value, and that means Intel's valuation will increase by 3 to 5 times. And Intel's price at that time was about $20 a share. So that means Intel's price will be about $60 or $100. And let's see what happened at 25 and 26. Right? So since our last analysis, that's before 2025, right, Intel's top management was changed and further layoffs to save money. And in about August 2025, U.S. government, the 10% equity stake, and then NVIDIA's $5 billion strategic stake. And I think towards the end of 2025, Intel's 18A process has reached a yield about 60%. And then Google's infrastructure deal, right? 18A yield up to 70%. And that's the Terafab initiative and the Apple Intel deal. And finally, most recently, Intel's yield, 18A yield, had reached 85%. So Intel started mass production. So, and you can see the stock price is moving along with the yield, actually. I would like to make another projection, right, on Intel's value right now, right, for August 2026. Intel has started the recovery in 2026 because it makes significant improvements in its 2-nanometer advanced process. But its value is still significantly smaller than its peers because its financials haven't come back yet. Right? As of August, right, 2026, Intel's value or market cap is $510 billion. AMD is about 50% more, $786 billion, and TSM is about $2 trillion. Right? Right? As I said before, right, Intel has made solid progress on 18A and 14A, and it will be the only advanced chip foundry, meaning less than 2 nanometers, right, on US soil. So most likely this is what's going to happen. Right? Intel and TSM will split the advanced chip market in 1 to 2 years, given their similar foundry capabilities. And Intel's value will be roughly about 50% of TSM, and with a price about $200. Okay, now you can check Intel's price today to find out how much it's worth. The reason I say this is likely is because there are two things I'm not sure. Right? Those two things, the first of that thing is let's look at the first unlikely scenario. Right? There could be another major issue, right, with the 18A or 14A process. Now it could happen, although it's rare, but if that happens, it's going to hit Intel hard and cut its value significantly. But I don't think it's going to break Intel, right, because it's a national security issue. This is the first unlikely scenario. The second unlikely scenario is that, for example, China invades Taiwan in year 2027 or 28. And it's going to wipe out TSM, the best plants or foundry plants of TSM completely. And Samsung in South Korea will also be in danger, right? Because it's very close to North Korea, and North Korea is a strategic partner of China. So in that event, Intel will become the world's only advanced chip foundry. And I can now imagine Intel's price if that happens. All right, let's come back to Apple's story, right? Apple sourcing semiconductors. Why we believe, right, Intel is the best IC supplier for Apple. Now, let's look at all the dimensions, all the supplier selection criteria. Right? Let's check them one by one and compare Intel versus TSM. Right? Innovation, technological capabilities, they're about the same. Production and supply chain capabilities, Intel actually is better, or at least the same as TSM. Pricing, Intel is excellent because Intel is so eager, right, to make chips for other companies. While in the same time, TSM has a significant bottleneck on its manufacturing capabilities, and its price has become so high now. Now, profitability-wise, Intel is poor because Intel barely break even now, and TSM is excellent. TSM is making a lot of money. But this really doesn't matter much because Intel is very healthy. It's not going away. Bargaining power, right? Apple definitely has the bargaining power over Intel, but not over TSM. Financial health, both of them are excellent. In terms of leaks and competition, they're also all excellent. So if you look at the green bars, right, for all these potential suppliers, Intel is clearly number one, right, and TSM is number two. So here's our suggestion, right, to Apple about sourcing integrated circuits, right, for its iPhone. We think that Apple should use a dual sourcing, use both TSM and Intel as the main foundries. Currently, TSM is used as the main foundry. And Apple should spread some work to Texas Instruments, Global Foundries, and so on and so forth for their specialties. This is close to Apple's sourcing strategy, except Intel, or at least not yet. And we think doing this, Apple can diversify its supply base, right, to reduce costs and risk. Again, everything here is written down in the paper, published in 2025. Feel free to take a look. Now let's look at the last story, right, I want to share is about American Airlines. And here I want to show you the framework to define and prioritize problems. All right. Again, I'm going to compare, right, what we teach or produce now versus what is counterintuitive. So what do we teach? We teach problem-solving skills, right? And what we produce? We produce technically competent students. Right? Unfortunately, these students will be replaced by AI. Right? Because they're competing directly with AI. Right? Not only that, right? These students do not see the big picture. Right? Just like the blind man with the elephant. I know many of you will not agree with me. I am completely okay with that. Right? However, I truly feel that we are teaching our students mostly the technical details, right, without a big picture. So what's counterintuitive? What should we teach and produce? Right? We think we should focus more. Right? We should not forget about problem-solving skills. What we should do is, on the top of the technical details, we should give students, right, framing and judgment. we should give them this kind of skills. Right? For example, right, here are all the problems of the company. Right? The question is, what's the real problem to solve? How do we set priorities? But that's the kind of training we should give to our students. So we can produce visionary leaders, right, who are compatible to AI, who can work with AI. So this can be best illustrated by example. So I'm going to look at American Airlines in the airline industry in recent years. Right, let's look at their stock price first. Right, I plot the stock price changes over time. Right, for American Airlines, for Delta, United, and so on, and together with the S&P 500 index. And you can see United in this 4-year period. Right, United stock prices increased by 161%. S&P 500 71%. And where is American Airlines? It's right here. It actually decreased by 14%. Just by looking at this graph, you will see American Airlines is in trouble, right, in comparison to its peers. The question is, what are the problems and how to set priority? Here is the competitive intelligence framework, right, we used, right, to discover and prioritize problems. It has 3 steps. We will start with industry analysis to assess, right, our industry's potential and risk. Using techniques such as competition intensity, right, how intensified competition is, industry trend, are we sunrising or sunsetting, right, and value chain analysis, right, what's the most valuable segment in my supply chain. And the second step is called competition positioning. Right, we're going to position our target company, right, in a competitive landscape to see where it stands, right, using techniques such as profit comparison, enterprise ranking, and KPI examination. Right, which is think about KPI examination as the physical examination of a company. And the last step is enterprise diagnosis, right, to discover and prioritize problems. Right, utilizing techniques such as strengths and weakness, right, breakdown analysis, and value driver analysis. So using this framework, right, we can answer the following questions. Right, for example, what are the market potential, right, risk, and trend? What are the most valuable segments in my supply chain? So I might move towards. And where do I stand, right, in a competitive landscape in comparison to my peers, and what are my strengths and weaknesses? And most importantly, right, which factors may drive a company's financial performance in my industry? And finally, what are my key problems and which one to solve first? Here I want to show you the most exciting moments of this story. First of all, how tough is this industry? Just one graph, you will see that. So I'm plotting all the airlines, right, on this graph, with x-axis being the total revenue, meaning size, and y-axis is the profitability, which is net margin. And you can see this is the big 3, right? The top 3 airlines enjoys: American Airlines, United Airlines, and Delta. All of them are profitable, although American Airlines is just barely profitable. And here are the medium players, right? These Southwest, right? Alaska Airlines, and I think JetBlue, right? And they have much smaller, right, margins than the big 3, and even one of that, JetBlue was losing significantly, so they're barely afloat. And the smaller airlines are here; they are largely lost. Right? And if you look at this, more than 50% of these airlines are losing money, and they can lose pretty significantly, more than 40%. Okay, so the conclusion is, right, this industry is tough, especially for smaller players. And this graph will also show you, right, the revenue breakdown will also show you exactly how tough it is. Now let's look at the industry average, which is on your left, right? It shows that cost of goods sold accounts for nearly 80% of the revenue, right? And net margin is about 3% for the industry on average. So this is a pretty tough industry, right? For $100 sales, 80% went to cost of goods sold. They only make, right, $3 on average. Now let's compare the big three, right? American Airline, Delta, and United. We can see that American Airlines cost of goods sold is greater than the industry average, right? It's less efficient, right? And its net income is only 0.2%, right? It's much smaller than the industry average, right? But Delta and United both have smaller, right, cost of goods sold than the industry average, and much higher, right, net income. Now, because cost of goods sold is the biggest portion of the revenue, so let's focus on cost of goods sold. Let's break down goods sold further to see its major component. Here is the breakdown of cost of goods sold for these airlines. And we find many common cost components, right? Such as, let me see here, such as the staff cost, which is the biggest portion, right? Rent and netting cost, right? Fuel cost, and operation, maintenance, and repair cost. Just by looking at these percentages, right, we find that American Airlines has the highest rental and netting fee, and also operating and maintenance cost. Remember, because American Airlines has the biggest cost of goods sold as a whole, right? Now, however, we're not sure about staff cost and the fuel cost. So what we do is we combine the revenue breakdown percentage with the cost of goods sold breakdown percentage to get the percentage for each individual cost component of cost of goods sold. And here it is. We find that, right, American Airlines is here in blue, right? It has the highest, right, cost components for all categories, from staff cost, right, to fuel cost, to rental and netting, and to operation, maintenance, and repair. And Delta is the best in all categories, and United is in between, right? And here, let's just imagine if American Airlines can match up, right, can improve its cost efficiency, right, and match up United. Its net margin, if you calculate the difference between American Airlines and United, you'll find out if American Airlines matched up with United, its net margin would be 5.7% rather than 0.2%. Just put this into perspective. 1% of revenue, of American Airlines revenue, is $600 million. Imagine its stock price. All right. Now, if you're the CEO or if you are the people in charge in this company, looking at this graph, right, this breakdown of cost structures, right, and in comparison with your peers, which one should be prioritized? Well, let's look at one with the highest financial stake, right? Staff cost, the difference is 2.3%. Fuel is about almost the same as United Airlines, but rental and netting fee is about 1.7% the difference. And OMR, operation, maintenance, and repair, is about 1.4%. So it turns out staff cost should have the priority because it makes the biggest financial difference. Now, the staff cost should be prioritized also because of the labor productivity issue, right? If you draw the labor productivity line over time for all these three companies, you'll find out that although American Airlines spent the highest cost on staff, it had the lowest labor productivity. Right, that's the revenue divided by number of employees, and the difference is actually very big. Right, per employee, American Airlines generates about $400,000 in revenue, and Delta about more than $600,000 per employee. Right, this example shows, right, how to break down right, step by step, a complex situation to isolate the operational issues with the greatest financial stakes. So let me wrap up, right, by students' testimonials. First comment says that financial impact of supply chain, which is the supply chain butterfly effect, provides an excellent understanding of how operational performance affects a company's market value. And here a student says, I find sourcing analytics module most useful, right? Because it shows how to narrow down choosing a supplier, right? Which would relate to what I want to do in my future job. So another student says, I find sourcing and inventory analytics, which I didn't cover here, to be most useful because I deal with these aspects the most at the job I'm currently working at. And here's another student's feedback. Says the competitive intelligence session, which is problem definition and prioritization, was another favorite because it showed how to analyze companies and spot problems like a consultant would. Now, these results, although the outcome were achieved by visual storytelling, I didn't give any math equations here, right? Instead, I just gave the pictures and tell stories behind the picture, right? Because visual storytelling is a powerful teaching tool, right? It's also a powerful skills for people in real life, right? Because they can tell the story hidden behind the data, and it can forge parts into a whole picture. All right, any questions, please? Again, all the materials covered today come from this book, here. If you're an instructor, I would be happy to share it with you. If you're not, and you are interested in this material, you can check out my Coursera specialization.